almost like we're not going to run out. And we're never really talking openly about what kind of financial implications there are. I know me personally, I always stress the ecological challenges with the strain of our water, the strain of our natural resources, and the strain of our, emissions from cars being on the roads, et cetera. But there's actually a financial implication to this lack of smart growth and investment. So that's why we have Commissioner of District 5, County Commissioner Kelly Martinez-Semrad here, and Commissioner-elect of the City of Orlando, District 1, Tom Keene here, to kind of share a little bit about their platform, how they hope to champion different policies that are smart growth policies. And so I'd like for both of them to introduce themselves, and then we'll have a couple questions in the front. And then Commissioner Semrad will walk through a PowerPoint presentation followed by a discussion. And then we're going to have Q&A at the end. So please save your questions for the end. If you want to drop them in the chat, we'll address them at the end.
I don't understand how that works.
And
why do you
please
have to
make
pay money
sure
for
that you're
future?
muting yourself so that we can be cognizant of our speakers. So starting with Commissioner Semrad, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your passion for smart growth policy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. Hi, everybody. Hello, Commissioner-elect Tom Keene. We shared some territory while you were a representative, and now we share more territory as you're a commissioner. So while making these general votes across the county and how we use our conservation land. So I also, just real quickly, because I think it matters just to say that we have a couple of people that I know that are running for office that are actually tuning in and listening as well. So I see Senator Vic Torres, who is tuning in and listening. He's actually running for the county commission seat where Split Oak Forest would be, as well as I think I saw Stephanie Ziegler for District 3. So it's just important to recognize the people who are
recording in progress,
running for offices, and also attending community meetings like this. So thank you everybody for joining. I know that there's so many other things that you could be doing this evening. I am Commissioner Kelly Martinez-Semrad. I am the District 5 Commissioner in Orange County. That takes up, has a really big commission. It goes from Maitland, College Park, downtown Orlando, Winter Park, Baldwin Park, all the way out to UCF, Lake Pickett area, Bithlo, Christmas, all the way out to the Brevard County line. And it encompasses the largest amount of rural land that is left in Orange County. And for a long time, I was part of an organization that was called Save Orange County. And that was a organization that really advocated against all of the detrimental harm that urban sprawl can cause. I was the vice chair for a long time. I sued the county back in 2017 for urban sprawl, for a development that was out in East Orange County, which was affiliated with the Lake Pickett text amendment. And we won in court at that point in time for Orange County promoting a style of growth that is referred to as urban sprawl, and how dangerous it can be in terms of how we spend our money, how we stop flooding, and how we protect wildlife lands. So it kind of compelled me to run for office, because I find that we're constantly fighting the same battle, and we keep saying, hey, growth doesn't always pay for itself. Hey, growth doesn't pay for itself. We talk about raising taxes to cover more services, but we continuously are growing, but we're never growing up. We continue to grow out, and it's a very expensive form of development for us, but very cheap for developers. And so how this all comes to be, where we can finally talk about the cost of urban sprawl, is because last November, Orange County voters demanded, with the County Charter Amendment 4, that we would start calculating the cost of rezonings or upscale zonings when land was going to be rezoned. So basically, developers had to prove that when they went to rezone land, that their development was going to cover the cost of itself, and that the burden would not be left on taxpayers. And that brought us to kind of this presentation that we're going to share with you tonight, which is entitled The Cost of Urban Sprawl, which is an instrument that the county developed with an organization called Urban 3 that actually was able to put behind a quantitative value as to how much urban sprawl is going to cost taxpayers. And it's important that we recognize this expense because, as everybody knows, affordability doesn't, the factor of affordability in Orange County and across the state of Florida and even the nation, it doesn't get cheaper to live. It gets more expensive to live. So we want to make sure that we are developing in a smart, sustainable way where it leaves an option for future generations to still be able to afford to buy a home. So that's where the this framework for the presentation comes from, and we're excited to share some numbers with you and to actually use Split Oak Forest as an example for essentially a cost of urban sprawl, using a forest to support a road to facilitate what is essentially rapid, unmanaged growth. So we have some great numbers for you tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Commissioner. And now Tom Keene.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Commissioner, thank you for the opportunity to join you tonight. I'm Tom Keene. I was recently elected to be City Commissioner for District 1, and over my shoulder you can kind of see a map there, and I don't expect that you can really zero in on it, but District 1 encompasses most of Lake Nona. It encompasses the Orlando International Airport and areas to the east and to the north, areas like Randall Park, Story Park, Meridian Park, and Vista Lakes to the far north. And then just a little bit to the west of the airport, there's a small part of the district that includes Southport and the Meadows of Boggy Creek. So mostly suburban area, but obviously the airport takes up a lot of that land space. We do have some wetlands. You can see, on the map there, there's some space there that is blank, and that's unincorporated Orange County. So what I'd like to point out is that the Split Oak Forest is not in the city limits, so it's technically not under the the city purview, if you will, and me as a district commissioner, but it is adjacent. And some of the traffic issues that we have obviously directly impact what we see on Narcoossee Road. And looking at some of the folks that are online right now, including Senator Torres, for example, who are very familiar with Narcoossee Road, but many of you may not be. But it's the main north-south artery from Osceola County up into Orange County, and it is over capacity at this point, and it's going to only continue to be congested. And so we're looking for some solutions to some of that issue. I don't expect we'll find them tonight, but I certainly will be asking for your thoughts on that. As far as the presentation we're about to see, I did see it at the Board of County Commissioners. It's really impactful, and I think it's very important for everybody to understand what the true cost of sprawl is. And so I'm looking forward to your questions tonight and to your feedback. So let's get out of it there, Lee. Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and have Commissioner Semrad kind of walk us through these slides.
Thank you, Lee. And at some point, could you please drop into the chat just the link with to Orange County TV's YouTube channel with the marker of where people can watch the Urban 3 presentation that really goes through the cost of urban sprawl. It's about 45 minutes long, so we're doing a condensed version of it, but there's lots of juicy information in there for just those people that are interested in mindful and sustainable development and what we should be striving to achieve. So at some point, can we just put that into the chat, please? All right, so we'll just begin with a very simple what is sprawl, because sometimes when we talk about urban sprawl, people are not necessarily sure what the term means. They know that it has something to do with how we develop and how we move forward and how we progress, but don't necessarily understand what its harm is and what its exact definition is. So if you look at this diagram right here, you see the nice big city center in the middle there. An urban sprawl becomes like this growth pattern where you expand the city or the urban portion to suburban and then ex-urban, and then you continue to go out and out and out and out with the edges of the city. And it makes you be more car dependent. We hear a lot of people refer to Orlando as Carlando. So the further that we move out, the more auto dependent we become. You see a lot more single family homes as the dominant housing style, which becomes a very expensive housing market. And we really begin to prioritize roads over mass transit connections. So that is what we begin to see when we see a growth pattern of sprawl. What we strive to do, though, next slide, please, is really understand, well, what's the cost if we continue to grow in this pattern? Because essentially you can produce numbers and data that'll actually show you that homes, as you begin to build out, are more affordable, but there's a lot more variables that come into place that we have to consider that actually begin to drive cost up. So if you take, for example, the unincorporated areas of Orange County, so those are going to be your lands that do not fall within municipalities like Winter Park, like Maitland, like the city of Orlando. If you look at that, we've got about 741 square miles, and the county spends about $1.1 billion annually on that infrastructure. And over the course of a lifespan of infrastructure, that would be about $1.3 billion over the lifespan. That equates to revenue coming in of about $8.5 billion, but our cost to maintain it comes in at about $8.7 billion. And that leaves us then with this estimate for 25 and 26, the years, with a negative $208 million net position of where we are. And these aren't our numbers. These are Urban 3's numbers from the presentation that they did. And I also just want to tell you that the District 5 team worked so hard on this presentation. This presentation was compiled by a research specialist in District 5, Ethan, who has been really studying the impacts of urban sprawl and how it affects the affordable housing market and just the cost of living in general. So these slides come from that presentation, as well as Ethan's long hours of compiling data into a sensilogical presentation. So if you look over to the right here, what you see is actually a conceptualization. Look down at the bottom, you see that the categories are stormwater, water and sewer, and roads. So in that stormwater, the green represents what the current spending is for the infrastructure on stormwater. Comes in at about 58 million. But right now in the capital, what we require is 95 million. If you look at water and reclaimed and sewer, you're looking at essentially what our current spending is 462. But again, if you look at what we actually are needing, it's 541 million. And then again, in roads, you're looking at, we're spending 595 million with our current spending, but the needed spending is approximately $688 million. That's our current position right now in unincorporated Orange County. And it comes again because we keep building out with less density, so the cost then becomes increased. Next slide, please. Obviously, over the course of time, when you have a negative net position that runs for years and years and years, eventually you get to a position where, because cost of services continues to go up, you're left in a predicament where either you have to reduce the number of services that you can offer, you have to offer them at a lower quality or a lower standard, or you have to do away with some services altogether. So we can't afford to run a net position negative over the course of years and years and years in a row. This shows one of the examples that Urban 3 gave to the Board of County Commissioners, and it shows you that if you take the same acreage here in these three different scenarios, you look at agriculture, if you were to be using land as agriculture, and you can notice that these developments are outside of the urban service area. So this is not within the urban core. But if you were to have a portion of land that's located in a rural area and it's functioning as agricultural, the county would be in a net position of $36,200. So you would be bringing in more revenue than what it would actually be costing you to service that parcel of land with schools, with police, with fire, with all of the infrastructure, roads, that sidewalks, things that may be necessary. If you look at the second situation, it's actually the most profitable for the county. It's to actually conserve that land in the rural area or outside of the urban core. And you see that then there's a net position of 38,000. However, if you were to sprinkle in low density residential, you're going to see that there's a net loss right there of $78,700. So every time that we begin to approve these developments that move further and further away from our urban core, we're driving ourselves into a position of more and more, a larger deficit that the existing taxpayers have to make up at some point in time before services and infrastructure begins to degrade. Additionally, I just want to say that sprawl consumes 40 to 80% more land, given the case study that you look at. But it also, as you consume more land, you reduce your ecological services. So just because land is sitting empty as a conservation, it doesn't mean that it's not doing anything for you or for your bottom line of your budget. It's going to help improve water quality. It's going to serve as flood mitigation, climate resilience, help reduce carbon, serve as a wildlife corridor or a functional space for wildlife to live. Lots of stormwater management that it will provide in terms of, like, an example, maybe one tree would absorb 2,270 gallons of rainfall per year. The cypress trees go even further up to approximately 8,000 gallons a year. So the land functions and is valuable to us in ways that we don't see by simply letting Mother Nature be a natural engineer to help us manage some of the normal weather scenarios that we see occur in Florida and help us reduce flooding instead of continuously increasing it. Next slide, please. This slide here just simply demonstrates over the course of history. So we started to look at things like this back actually in the late 80s. And you can see in this graph here, there's a solid line where down at the bottom, it shows you the dwelling units per acre. So you can see that the lesser homes that you have, the more expensive it comes to maintain them when they move further and further out. The more units that you have linked closer together in that urban core, it begins to cost collectively people less money. So infill development helps provide lots of money in terms of annual savings per capita compared to the actual sprawl that we see in development that moves out. Next slide. So that's not how we want to grow. And voters in Orange County are very clear that this is not how we want to grow. And that's evidenced by, for example, when 86% of voters voted to actually protect split oak forest and said, we do not want a toll road through our forest that was bought with our money, sustained with our money, and left to us in perpetuity. Nobody said don't go around the forest. People said don't go through our forest. So we don't want to grow in a sustainable, in a fashion where we have to begin talking about putting roads through conservation lands so that we can alleviate a car-dependent style form of development that we see. We want to grow smart. So what does that actually mean? Smart growth is a pattern that's going to be defined by compact development that then facilitates multimodal transportation so that we can get away from a car-dependent culture, so that we can get people off of the road, so that we can live in walkable, bikeable communities it's just a healthier form of living, all the while conserving our natural resources. And, I spoke about how 86% of voters voted for split oak forests. Well, 90% of voters voted for the right to clean water. 88% of voters voted for a supermajority vote to change conservation land from conservation to any other form of zoning. 73% voted for a rural boundary. 70% voted to protect the St. Johns Basin from annexation of essentially developers. So Orange County voters want smart growth. We want smart development. We want the compact infill. We want mixed use. And we want to conserve our natural spaces as well. And time again, the voters demonstrate that's what they expect from their local leaders. Next slide. So here are some case studies just from across the United States, just to look at the difference in what sprawl can cost you versus what smart planning can cost you. So if we look at the case of Maryland, in Maryland, they saved $12 billion in capital costs and $250 million in operations and management costs. And essentially the way that they did that is that they looked at doing compact development that would require 2.5 times fewer miles of local roads in a 20-year time period of planning. And that saved them billions of dollars in just looking at reducing how many miles of roads they're actually paving. In Delaware, they ran a different scenario approach, and they said, okay, if we continue to build in a sprawling scenario, what do we get? And if we do infill and smart growth, what will we get? And Delaware found, which is a very small place, that if they did smart growth, they could use 72% land, and that they would see that the infrastructure and services would cost approximately $27,000 a household. The alternative scenario of sprawl was that you would use 150% more land, but it would cost households $45,000 a year to support the infrastructure related services of that sprawling scenario. And then you can see in Virginia, they were looking at how they could use smart development for a 2 transit orientated development corridor, and it made up 48% of the county's total revenue. Despite it taking much less land to do it. So looking at it as a priority to help with transit is also part of the function of smart growth, and one of the detriments of urban sprawl. Next slide, please. So something else to consider is when we hear people talking about, and Urban 3 mentioned this, and this comes from an additional source as well that was referencing it, that the District 5 team found, is that you hear sometimes people will say, yeah, but if developers build in a rural area, the cost of land is less, and therefore the cost of the home is less, and that's a good growth model then. Well, actually, if you look at how this could actually compare, and this is, I believe, Nashville is using this as an example when they were advocating for smart growth. The yellow in the left in that diagram shows sprawling and the areas that would be considered affordable. And that looks like a really good thing when you see like, oh, wow, look at all this yellow affordability. But that only carries one variable of consideration, and it's just housing cost. What it doesn't take in consideration is how much it costs to support all of those services. And it doesn't take into consideration the transportation costs for residents for maintaining vehicles, gas, toll, insurance, etc. So when you put into consideration the other taxation that has to occur to support sprawl, as well as the cost of a car, you can actually see on the right side there, all of that dark blue then becomes unaffordable. And you only see small sprinkles of yellow areas indicating an affordable place for people to live. So it's important for us to consider when we talk about urban sprawl, it's not just about housing supply. It's a system of resources and services that has to come with it. And it's that infrastructure, services, and resources that drives the cost of sprawl up over the course of time. And of course, it becomes much more expensive to sustain. Here we have just a fun fact that residents of compact multimodal neighborhoods typically drive 30 to 70% fewer annual miles, reducing their transportation costs by anywhere from 10 to 60%. For compact housing types, which is typically costs 10 to 40% less than the comparable quality. So it makes a difference when you consider multiple variables and how sprawl impacts transportation, cost of services, etc. It becomes more expensive. Next slide, please. Again, this is just going to provide more conceptual diagrams here to just demonstrate how when we start talking about building sprawl, we really do have to start considering that we are presenting a scenario where we're getting further and further away from having any type of mass transit system that would be functional. I think it's really important here just to mention that it's not just people of Orlando, it's not just people in unincorporated Orange County, but every single day we have about 210,000 tourists or visitors that are also living amongst us and in our community. And so when we talk about trying to get a transit system that works, we're also trying to get a transit system that works so that our number one economic contributor in the area doesn't collapse when tourists start saying, stop going to Orlando, traffic is terrible. So we want to make sure that we're also protecting our local economy with smart growth by looking at transit solutions to get vehicles off the road through smart development. These documents right here, if you look at them, the one at the very bottom here, I think is very interesting because, again, it takes into consideration combinations of variables where when you consider not just housing price, but you also then average in the commute and the duration of time, you can see that the dark color is essentially spending much more time in automobiles and driving to work, being in traffic jams, driving home, everywhere you go, there's traffic. And if you look at Nashville as the example, the light color in the middle is where you're spending less and less time in your car if you live there. And the further you get out into the suburban and rural areas, you're going to see that it becomes a darker color. And that's an indicator that you're spending much more time in your car than the average person. And the other one just above it is also demonstrating, what is the type of living style that you will spend the most amount of time in your car. And we see a lot there in the suburb area. Next slide. So in terms of smart growth and economic development, because we can talk about how expensive sprawl is, you can look and you can say, okay, if we grow smart, I'm looking at spending about $25,000. If we grow in a sprawl, I'm looking at spending $45,000. That's the individual unit level for consumption of a person. But this is how sprawl can also impact your local economy. So if you look there in a smart growth policy, you would actually see that you would have reduced per capita of land consumption. So you'd begin to consume less land with smart growth. And the economic then development of that, or the impact, then becomes that you have increased agricultural productivity, which is an economic activity with low leakage effect. You have a chance for preservation for recreation and tourism industries, which also brings in revenue to your local economy. Smart growth has public infrastructure and service efficiencies. That means that it reduces the overall cost and expense of your government to operate and reduce utility cost savings for actual taxpayers. You reduce your transportation costs. This study by Urban 3 actually says that the average person is spending approximately $14,000 a year in insurance and gas and car payments and car maintenance to keep a car. Imagine if you didn't have that $14,000 and what else you could be spending that on, and how that consumption then might shift in our local economy, where we see that the economy begins to flourish more locally then as well. You have more livable communities. The quality of life is much higher in a walkable, bikeable community. People like living in a place where you can work, you can play, and you can live. And right now, we're not producing that style of development in Orange County. Improved mobility for drivers, which improves your economic opportunity. As well as decreases the amount of time you spend in your car, and of course helps reduce crashes and improved public health as well. So all of the things, the smart growth policies are not just always about improvement in terms of your quality of life of how you live it, but it also has dollar signs that surround it in terms of improving our local economy as well. So we're coming to the end here. This is kind of the big bang at the end of Urban 3's presentation here. Is what you see here is that these spikes are the areas where you begin to see where infill is resulting in more productivity or a higher market value per acre. That big spike there with the purple, you've got downtown Orlando and you've got downtown Winter Park. So downtown Orlando is by far the highest that we've got. You've got Winter Park that is there. You see a little segment over by University of Central Florida. Winter Garden has a little thing that's popping off. The Lake Nona Town Center has a little area that is popping off. But what you see in all the other places that are essentially in between those perks, that's wasted. That's costly space. That's what that is. It's costly space because we didn't grow from a core out. We leapfrogged over in terms of development. What this results in is what the next slide actually shows us. This results in, and again, you see where now the black is. Those are your net positive areas. Look at your net negative areas, resulting in $208 million for the county's net position just in 2026. So this is a result of when you sprawl, when that's the growth pattern that is promoted or is accepted, is tolerated and is passed by a board of county commissioners. This is how it impacts your bottom line, your checking account, your ability to buy a home, your children's ability to buy a home. It's what helps increase unhoused rates, which is increasing. We all see it. But this is something that we need to be attentive to. We need to be calling attention to. And we need to be requiring that local leaders really stand up and advocate for smart growth, because it's expensive for all of us, but it's putting our future generation here in Orange County further and further behind. Do we have another slide, Lee? No, this is just some further just examples on smart growth and how it can protect your environment. It reduces transportation emissions by 48%. The team gave some really great case studies in Springfield, Missouri. They spend $75 a year for the life of a tree. But by saving the life's tree, you can save $115. So it might cost you money to save it, but ultimately it'll save you money in the long run with a net savings of $2.2 million. And then we have some comparative stats there from Denver to Orange County. In Denver, 69% of the neighborhoods are compact, walkable, whereas here in Orange County, unfortunately, we're at 1%. So we have a lot of area where we can improve, which is the good news to this. So here's just to illustrate that climate or emissions and how you can reduce carbon emissions. Some of us might think that if I live in a city, that my carbon emissions are going to be higher because of actually where I live. Well, if you look at like per household or per person, and you look here, the longer that you spend in your car, the more carbon emissions you're actually letting off. So you see that by building in a more tight, compact way, that green area is indicating that the per capita in terms of the emissions is lower in the city's core than what it actually is as you go out to the suburban areas, because you're driving further and you're in your car longer. So it's the amount of emissions that you're putting off is much less when you live in an urban core area. Next slide. So in conclusion here, you know, like we're talking about split oak forest, and everybody is like, yeah, okay, urban sprawl costs us money, but how does it all tie back to split oak forest? And I just want to lay some things out. Split oak forest it's a CFX toll road that we're talking about that will run through the forest. And in doing that, it's not a public facility or a linear facility that's free to the public. It charges the public, but in order to charge the public to use that road, it takes away a natural resource. And that natural resource was a forest that was bought with our money, left to the people of Orange County and the wildlife in perpetuity, as in forever, to offset overdevelopment. And it's ironic now that we talk about the fact that we need to put a toll road through a forest because we have built ourselves into a situation where traffic is so bad, they can't get out of it. And split oak forest was the easy solution. It was the cheapest solution. they can go around the forest. It just simply costs more money. And by enabling this toll road, it enables the ball to continue rolling, where this is not a fix for forever. This is a short-term solution until you need to build another lane, until you need to build another highway. And we will find ourselves in a situation of where we are constantly having to use conservation land, new land for more roads, more miles, and costing us more money. So I think it's just really important that we are educated on this. We're coming into an election year in Orange County where 7 seats all at once are all available. And we're going to have a lot of candidates that are running for them. And I think that when somebody comes to ask for your vote, that it's really important for you to say, what do you think about how we're going to develop? How do we develop smart? Because it not only impacts your checking account from how much your home costs you, but it's how much your car costs you, how much your gas costs you, how much your tolls cost you. And by the way, how much will your flood insurance cost you? Because we know why we're flooding. We're filling in wetlands for urban sprawl instead of sustaining flood mitigation lands to prevent that from happening to residents. So that's essentially our presentation on the cost. And I don't know, Lee, do you have? Oh, so Ethan, he put some additional slides in here at the end. This is just, again, how does Orange County fare here? Like if you look again, remember that slide, that Nashville, where I showed you the Nashville slide? Affordability, it looks like we're pretty affordable on the left. But then when you look on the right, if you consider more variables that you have to add to the equation to actually calculate affordable, this is what our growth pattern has gotten us. And you can see that there's very little affordable areas. In the east, you've got Bithlo, and on the west, you've got very small portion outside of Winter Garden. There's not a lot, and some in downtown. Next slide. So Ethan broke this down, and our team, we looked at some of the statistics. So what does this all really mean for you for a bottom line? Here we've got $11,000 approximately for owning your car, $1,700 in average monthly housing costs. The gross rent, we see that rent is going up in the air. Electricity, our power grids are over. So you see that utility costs are constantly going up right now. Everything from stormwater management to waste management to also electricity. You begin to see the rising costs. And we're spending about 27 to 68 hours in traffic, and that comes from a reference in 2024. So sprawl costs us money. There's no doubt, and it's unfortunate because it's oftentimes the developers that make the millions, and then the taxpayers are left to pick up that bill.
All right, so this is my section. Just 3 or 4 quick images just to show you. Commissioner Semrad brought up some of the concerns in terms of Split Oak being a prime example of some of this sprawling infrastructure that costs us so much funding. And it also costs us something that's not quantified, which is our ecological systems that carry life and biodiversity. So many of you already know about Split Oak and, the history of Split Oak Forest. We've had several of their town halls and we'll have more over the course of this year. So I won't dive into these slides, but I just highlighted, the funding. More than $8 million originally went into the initial acquisition of this land, to which Orange County contributed funding up to $2 million in the initial acquisition. Then there's also 30 years of maintenance, gopher tortoise mitigation, staff fees, FWC staff, management, controlled burns, legal fees, grant writers. There's so many other staff and other fiscal responsibilities that have gone into maintaining this land for 30 years that you paid for, you as the residents of Orange and Osceola County. Of course, they're just saying, well, only, 160 acres are going to be impacted. That's really nothing. 60 acres will be directly impacted by the road itself, but then of course the buffer zones around the toll road will also be indirectly impacted, with the noise and species not wanting to congregate there. And for that, they're basically trying to suggest that that's all that's going to be impacted. This is not necessarily the case, because when you actually start to do controlled burns, you can't do controlled burns next to a toll road. People have to drive. So that means other parcels within the forest will be impacted because of lack of maintenance and upkeep. So, there's millions of dollars on the line here for us. And there's millions of dollars on the line for the development interests that are looking at this project as something that can offset some of their costs. And so this slide basically reiterates some of what I said. Again, we're going to have other town halls to talk through some of the history of Split Oak. But I really wanted to get to these images. So this is the Central Florida Expressway master plan. The little divot that you see here in the purple, that's Split Oak Forest. As you can see, there's a lot of toll roads in the works that are being projected by future growth. This funding that we would potentially allocate for these toll roads could also be diversified for transit options. But instead, we're looking at allocating millions of dollars over the course of the next decade for toll roads that are literally in the middle of nowhere. If you overlay, and I'll get back to that slide, if you overlay these toll roads, you can see this dark green color. That's the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So you can see directly that these natural lands that are panther, bear, and so many different habitats for so many different types of species are, endemic species that are found nowhere else in the world are going to be severed by these projected toll roads. Now, when I spoke to CFX and asked them, how do you quantify demand? They just basically said they're looking at easements that are entitlements of future development. And as you can see, Deseret Ranch, which is a project by Tavistock on the property owned by the Mormon Church, you can see that pretty much from almost Seminole County down below the southern part of Osceola is owned by the Mormon Church, and they're looking to put more than 500,000 homes, which means upwards of 1 million people, the size of the city of Orlando, right in the middle of our wildlife corridor. And this shows me that these toll roads are to connect this development. It's not for us. These toll roads that we're using our tax dollars that could be going into transit and other infrastructure to take money off of our backs, having to have a $14,000 a year maintenance cost on our automobiles, could be going towards transit options and diversifying, getting cars off of our current roads and decongesting our current infrastructure. But instead, we're pouring resources into engineers, purchasing land, buying easements, so that we can destroy our wildlife corridor on our tax dollars, basically. But something that I wanted to mention, because a lot of people that come out to advocate for the toll road because they hate, spending hours away from their family on Narcoossee, one thing I want to mention is this came from the Central Florida Expressway 534 website, sr534.com, where you can see the 3 phases of this toll road. Now that phase 1, even though there will be some class 1 wetland impacts, for the most part, that is within the city of Orlando limits. And we see this as a viable way to potentially get cars off the road on Narcoossee and to the 417. However, phase 2 and phase 3 are literally here in the wildlife corridor where this little dip is. There's nothing out there. Those extensions, phase 2 and phase 3, are for future development. It's not for us. It's not for the people that are spending an agonizing amount of time on Narcoossee, but yet people are begging for this toll road because their quality of life has been lowered because of the congestion. So this is an extremely important graphic to show folks. And, thank you to the District 5 office and our incredible team for putting this slide deck together. Ethan, shout out to you. And now I'd just like to take a couple minutes for Commissioner-elect Tom Keene and Commissioner Sumrad to just kind of reflect on some of these points, and maybe then we can move to a Q&A.
Well, I think it was a fantastic recap that you did, Commissioner Cimarron. That it was better than the one that I heard when I was listening to the Board of County Commissioners. They, when we run for office, a lot of folks use buzzwords like smart growth, and very rarely do you understand what that really means. And I think we saw that in this presentation today, how important that smart growth is. And it's not just pie in the sky kind of, it's actual real things that we can do today, tomorrow, that will have an impact on our lives. And I think it's very important to take that that idea of smart growth and actually implement it. And it makes sense when candidates are at your door to ask them specifically, what is it that you mean by smart growth? Because there could be a lot of definitions, but what we just heard tonight was really powerful, I think, and it can show how well we can tackle affordability and congestion at the same time, how we can make our quality of life better, and make our live, work, and play in the same community. It's very powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree, Tom. And for people that, if you can just go to the chat, I know Lee put the link to actually watch the Urban 3 presentation. And I have watched a lot of county commission meetings over my course of advocacy in our community. And I would say this was probably one of the best presentations that was actually done, where it took very complicated data and was able to break it down into very layman understanding. It was excellent. So I see Lee just put it in there again. So please check it out. And just like Tom said, when somebody says, yeah, I support smart growth. Well, what does smart growth mean to you? Because it shouldn't mean that we're flooding more, and it shouldn't mean that we're using our conservation land for anything other than what we told voters we would use it for, conservation land. It's time to uphold our promises. And I just wanted to reflect on one other thing when I talk about promises, because when you say that you will leave something to a community in perpetuity until a developer needs it for a toll road, or until, we have so much traffic that we need it for a toll road, it messes with voter confidence, and that's then really hard to go to the community and say, oh, I need to raise your taxes to cover an infrastructure deficit. That's hard to gain that voter confidence back again, because if you have elected officials voting to put roads where people are saying, we don't want the road, then why in the world would they entrust you to increase their tax to generate a pot of money when they don't believe that we won't put a road where they don't want a road? So it's important to be mindful of the fact that, when promises are made, you keep the promise. And I think it's also, with this development, something that we're just now learning is that with the Osceola Parkway extension, it's not just Split Oak Forest that's impacted. This actually goes through, that's on the Osceola side, but on the Orange County side, it goes through Eagles Roost, which is an area that's very close to Back to Nature. And then it also goes through mitigated conservation lands. So lands that were already supposed to make up for negative impacts somewhere else. And then they mitigated those, so they mitigated it again. And, we had a legal attorney we had a legal review of this, and they basically said, this land is so well protected under so many different layers. If we can't figure out how to protect this from urban sprawl, then we're in big trouble across the state with all of our conservation land. So I think this is really important to recognize that conservation land has dollar signs behind it that matter to our pocketbooks. And that I think that given that Tallahassee can't really seem to figure out how to solve our flooding problem, we might be able to, from a grassroots local level, say, hey, stop filling in the wetlands, and we make our own local difference that way. But anyways, thank you everybody for listening. We're both super passionate about it, and you know, it makes a difference to be able to have the opportunity to have community members care enough to tune in and listen. So thank you.
Awesome. So do we have any questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand, your little virtual hand, so we can create a queue. And it looks like somebody in the chat already asked, I'm posting this for the Q&A. If all this sprawl is making things more expensive by being car dependent, why is it that the places that are more walkable, more expensive with either high rent or high HOA fees?
So we in Orange County in the unincorporated areas I speak to, so not into the city or Winter Park or Maitland or anything like that. We have an inventory problem. And our inventory problem, when you start to, it's actually part of a much larger study. We actually have the 12th highest vacancy rate in our housing demand in the country. The problem is that much of the housing supply is either in short-term rentals or it's priced too high. But we have an inventory problem. And so what we really need to start doing, and what Vision 2050 aimed to try to do, was diversify the housing population that we had, or the type of housing that we had. Right now, what you have is, in the walkable communities, it's built for luxury homes. It's not built for mainstream living. And it comes down to supply. So we need to increase the amount of supply, and to help drive costs down in terms of those types of neighborhoods.
And you'll see in the city of Orlando, I mean, obviously we don't have the wide expanse of empty lots. So there's a lot more infill. And I think a lot of times there's an increased cost when you're building inside of a city that have to be recouped. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a walkable, as we saw. And so infill is very important. I think that, at least inside the city of Orlando, that should be one of the areas that I will be concentrating on, making sure that we're able to use zoning and other policy avenues to make sure that we're able to build to help reduce some of that deficit that we have in housing units. And then once you reduce the deficit a little bit, then some of those costs will probably come down. I can't speak to HOAs though. I think every single community in my district is associated with an HOA.
We have David's hand up.
Hello, yes, I wanted to ask, at the city level, who really represents the status quo of this, urban sprawl we currently see? And, what can we do to, change that?
Well, there's a lot of things that are happening in the city right now relative to infill, and I just mentioned that. So part of it is we just had an election where we're going to go into a 2-year period here. We're going to see as Commissioner Cimarron talked about, we're going to see a tremendous amount of change in elected officials over the next 2-year period. Starting with, we just are going to be seating this Monday the first 3 city council seats for the first full term that we've done. So in, I don't know, decades, right? Where 3 of the 6 have turned over. Now, granted, one of them, Commissioner Rose, was elected a few months ago, but this will be her first full term. And myself, and then District 3, also Commissioner Chapin, will be starting our first term. And then next year, we've got 6 of the 8 county commission seats and the mayor as well. And then 2 years from now, we've got 3 more commission seats and the mayor of Orlando. So over the next two years, you'll have lots of opportunities to look at candidates and ask them the hard questions to see, if they are aligned with your values. And I think that there are going to be a lot of good ones out there.
We have a question from Millie Dawson in the chat. Are there any policies under construction or in place already to limit the number of housing units that can be used as short-term rentals? Or are there few or no real limits that use of housing units?
Um, Liam, Liam, so sorry. You went in and out on me. Can you say that again? I had heard about a third.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question is about short-term rentals. Do we have a way to limit illegal short-term rentals?
Mm. Yeah, so in unincorporated Orange County, I can't speak to the city's side, but in unincorporated Orange County, we do not allow short-term like Airbnbs. Because what was happening is we had companies that were buying homes off of the affordable housing market, and then we're using them as Airbnbs, and that was absorbing our affordable housing market supply and it driving costs up. So we do have a policy in unincorporated Orange County. The problem becomes enforcement of that policy. We are dealing with, in District 5, we have numerous locations that we know of, the police know of, but it becomes very difficult to actually enforce that. And it's something that actually, when you speak of HOAs, that's actually a very good thing that HOAs do is that they do kind of keep better tabs on the short-term rentals that are on the underground market. But other than that, we don't have any other types of regulations or limits, maximums, or anything like that for any type of housing.
And I was just going to make the same comment about the HOA that I live in is very vigilant about making sure that those short-term rentals are, they pop up, people hear about them and they report them right away. So the owners get notified, from the HOA. I think that's it's neighbors understanding who lives in their neighborhood. And if they see folks that don't belong there, then they can make that call.
Awesome. And this next question is actually really important. With all the preemption legislation coming from Tallahassee, how can we even expect to have local control over our development?
Yeah. So
That's a good question.
that is an excellent question. And I mean, I'll tell you very, very honestly, this legislative cycle is looking very dismal for a lot of things pertaining to local government. And we can start with, like when you start talking about the fact that local governments no longer get to decide what can go into their comprehensive plan, or when you start to create legislation like Senate Bill 180, that was emergency management that was totally bipartisan, and you allow, and an investigative journalist did the work and learned it. You learn that the lobbyists who were Tavistock and the Mormon, the Deseret Ranch, to add a couple sentences to contaminate an emergency management bill to just allow developers to have control and to say, if I don't like it, I'm going to call it burdensome and restrictive, and I can now sue you for it. And that's what's happening in, unfortunately, Tallahassee. You have way too many, you have more of the politicians there than not are dependent upon the development industry to provide big campaign donations. And they do favors in terms of legislation, and it's never favors that help us. They are favors that are cut to allow developments that preempts local governments, preempts voters. And I tell you that the only thing that we can do, you guys, is that this is a battle at the ballot box. And essentially, I mean, at some point in time, we have to start asking questions even if you are a party voter and you vote down the line, and that somebody is making promises, in terms of the legislation and preempting local government and for how they see development, write a candidate's name in, but don't vote for that person, because it's impacting all of us, regardless of what party affiliation are. We're flooding, our wildlife corridor is decimated, housing is expensive, roads are expensive, everything, the cost is going up, and it's because we've allowed for developers to have too much say in our policy.
Well, we have a lot of questions about that in the chat with regards to how Vision 2050 is, if it's in standstill, is it going to move across the finish line? Given the situation with Senate Bill 180, what exactly will Orange County do to offset the damage of that bill and what it did to Vision 2050?
Yeah, so we were just talking about this today in the office. So for Tom, Commissioner-elect, our Senate Bill 180 and Vision 2050 conflicted. That was going to be our new comprehensive land use plan. And when that bill passed, essentially we had to shelve Vision 2050. And we were just talking about that today because when Senate Bill 180 passed, we got listed as having 14 things, that overarching themes that were in Vision 2050 as being more burdensome and restrictive. Some of those things were like pedestrian and bicycle paths so that people can be safer without being in a car. Some of it was stormwater management. Some of it was I think like affordable housing. There was a lot of things that were in there that, we wouldn't all say are burdensome and restrictive, but again, it wasn't our ability to define that. So that now what we're looking at is even more legislation will come out this year, likely, that will again, kind of gouge a piece out of Senate Bill 180 and then maybe another year. So essentially it's a living document sitting on a shelf waiting to see what happens in court. If we don't win, and when I say we, it's Orange County along with I think 17 other municipalities or counties within the state, then we look at really turning over the development keys to Tallahassee to decide what is best for local communities.
Well, as Tom mentioned, we have a big election year coming up. I just dropped the one of my dear friend, John Hallman, who is the head of Defend Rural Florida, his legislative tracker in the chat for folks that want to take a look at that. We'll also be emailing it out. But Jacob in the chat was talking about, as elected officials, what sway do you have on the CFX long-term plans for these new toll roads?
So one thing that I pushed this year for us at Orange County to get it on the legislative delegation, I did not get it there. I'm going to keep talking about it with my colleagues at the BCC every chance I get on the dais, is that one of the reasons that our conservation land can be used for toll roads is because of a legislative amendment that was made several years ago that gave these agencies like CFX condemnation power, where they can eminent domain our land. And that should not be that you can use our land and our conservation. And if you look at where all of the roads are running, it's ironic that it's running all through our conservation land. It's never running anywhere else. So I think that we need to work with the state in order to protect our conservation land. And I think that there's good news there because, in this last election cycle, again, 88% of people voted to have a supermajority to rezone parks and conservation land. Nothing can be achieved at 88% without bipartisan support. And so I think that we have a good opportunity, not only locally here, but across the state to hopefully get that reformed in the future with the right bill.
And I would point out that both CFX and other boards include political officials that have been elected, right? So if you're upset with what CFX does, there are some folks on the board that you can talk to. So just take a look at the board, and the membership changes from year to year on who's on it and who's off. But I think there's a county commissioner from Seminole, there's a county commissioner from Orange, county commissioner from Osceola that are on CFX's board, as well as I don't know if the mayor, I think the mayor is on, mayor of Orlando might be on that board as well. So there are definitely folks to talk to ask them those questions when we have an election coming up.
Awesome. So we're coming up to 8 o'clock. We do have a question about holding developers accountable to paying their fair share on infrastructure costs. If somebody wanted to talk through some of our impact fees.
Lee, I just want to talk about that. One thing to be really grateful for with regards to that question is what voters decided to do last November when they passed Charter Amendment 4 and said enough is enough. If you want to do rezonings and all this different type of building, other than what it's zoned for, prove that you're not costing me money in infrastructure. So voters took the very first step to require this fiscal sustainability tool to make sure that developers are carrying their fair share. Additionally, several years ago, one of the initiatives that was led by the Board of County Commissioners was to increase impact fees to 100%. And that was a very contentious vote for them because the industry pushed back hard. But on every unit that they were building, they had a deficit in terms of their impact fees. So we are collecting 100%. The problem is that we're so far behind the 8 ball that it doesn't. We're still losing money. And when you look at things like a net position of negative $200 million for just 1 year, you understand the precarious position that we're in terms of not having enough money for sidewalks, for bikes, for multimodal transportation, for complete streets. We built ourselves into a real conundrum over the course of time with bad building patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And last but not least, I know some folks were asking about, what's next with Split Oak. I dropped in the chat, just since we're wrapping up, a press conference that we're hosting on Tuesday, the 13th at 8 a.m. If you can come, please come. If you can't join us, please share the Facebook Live. We'll be streaming the press conference live. Commissioner Wilson actually brought this to the board a few months ago before the holiday, asking for a commissioner's report on the impact of other conservation lands on the Orange County side of the toll road. And since then, there's been a lot of updates. I sent out a big, deep dive video, 8 minutes long, out in our newsletter. Please go to savesplitoak.org. You'll see it embedded on the homepage. But in a nutshell, there's a lot of moving pieces that are all coming to a head, including a lawsuit that concluded between Osceola County suing Orange County over our charter amendment. And so it's really important that we have a chance to talk through that and mobilize at the Board of County Commission meeting in Orange County on January 13th and give public comment after the press conference at 9 a.m. Last question we'll take before closing out and doing last remarks will be from Katrina Shaddix with Bear Warriors United.
Oh, hi. Thank you. Hi, Lee. This has been a great, informative Zoom. I've loved it. Such good information. So thank you for that. And I wanted to bring up another fact that demonstrates how corrupt our state government is. There is a conservation easement statute for the state of Florida. And the conservation easement is what we've seen. There was one on Split Oak, and it's what government uses to put on pieces of land to conserve that land, supposedly forever in perpetuity. However, there's part of that statute allows for the seller or the buyer, the person who gets money for putting that conservation easement on the landowner, or the government body who gives them the money for the conservation easement. Either party can remove the conservation easement at any time. And this is a huge, it was almost written in a way to double dip into taxpayer dollars. You have your landowner that will get millions of dollars to put a conservation easement on that land. And then in about 10 years, they can take it off and sell it to a developer. So it's kind of a grift, what's going on with the state, with landowners. And unfortunately, it's infiltrated the wildlife corridor and has turned into just a big grift for landowners that are, claiming to keep Florida green with cows, but they are definitely planning on removing those conservation easements, selling the land, making sprawl development on those pieces of land that we pay millions of dollars for to protect. And we tried to get a bill in last session, we had a House representative that was going to sponsor it, did an interview, and the developers got to him, and the head of the party got to him, and he would not sponsor that bill. Why? Because it interfered with developer profits. So the corruption is deep, and I'm glad y'all brought up to everyone to beware of people running for office, because these same developers are paying for specific people to run to ensure their profits continue, in the face of our quality of life, our natural lands and wildlife being protected. They are more than happy to sell every single one of us down the road. So if y'all could help us in the upcoming season, I know you can't endorse, but if you could say, hey, this candidate did this, and help the people see the good stuff and the bad stuff that have been done, I think that helps voters a lot. Thank you for this great presentation.
I agree. In summary, she's saying follow the money when you see candidates that are running,
Yes.
and also just pay attention to candidates that are here. And again, I know that Senator Vic Torres, who's running for the Lake Nona area, is on, as well as Stephanie Ziegler, who's running in District 3. There's not to say that other candidates don't care, but they're just pay attention to who's around you and trying to learn as well. So.
Well, Stephanie's had her hand up for a while. Do you mind if we take one last question?
Hi, I specifically have a question. Although there's a lot of places in unincorporated Orange County where the city of Orlando is literally across the street or next door in many instances. How are the two jurisdictions coordinating planning and development standards so that you don't end up with conflicting outcomes?
Well, the conflicting outcomes happen all the time. So, and we almost had a very conflicting outcome in the last election, where on the eve of the event that people were voting on establishing a rural boundary, the city of Orlando was unfortunately taking votes that were passing only with one in denial to annex all of the land that was inside of the rural boundary out before the election closed. So it was on literally the eve of the election. So, fortunate again, in this last election cycle, you had voters who actually passed Charter Amendment 10, which protects land now from annexation. But those types of annexations, they're not always contentious, right? Like sometimes the city, will just expand and take a street or do this, but those are not necessarily contentious annexations, but when you see huge swaths of land, like 52,400 acres, of unincorporated land that you try to annex. So they do work together in a joint planning agreement in terms of what's being annexed, who's doing what services, and it's a fluid process with all of the municipalities.
And if you're talking about more specifically, I don't want to say big picture, but very narrow. I think the two staffs work together. If they're literally right across the street, let's just say you're on Narcoossee and you're building a McDonald's on one side of the street and you're putting in something on the opposite side that would not work together. I don't know what that would be, but just as an example, I think the two staffs would work together to help figure out, how to approach that, and then work through either the city commissioner and the county commissioner. We have, I talk to Kelly all the time, and I'm sure I'll continue after I'm sworn in to do that. We're allowed to do that. So hopefully those discussions are being made on a regular basis. We've got some donut holes too, by the way, in the city of Orlando.
Yeah.
I say that, and I don't know that the county likes that, to be honest, because they have to provide services to pieces of property right smack dab in the middle of the city, and maybe not even Orlando. It could be Edgewood or some of the other. I think. Well, how many incorporated cities do we have? 12 or 13 in the city of and the county of Orange County. But sometimes you have those, and that's not something we talked about, but it is something that is, it's a little costly for the county then to have to provide services to one of those little donut holes. So I don't think that was quite your question there, Stephanie, but hopefully that.
I appreciate the both of you responding. So thanks so much. This was a great presentation.
Right. So any closing remarks from our special guests as we're closing at the 8 o'clock point?
The only thing that I have to say is that next fall, it's myself and Commissioner Nicole Wilson in District 1, where we are the two that are for sure there. All the other seats plus two new ones are up for grabs. And, you know, we're still fighting for a forest that 86% of people said it was the responsibility of the Board of County Commissioners to protect it. And we're quite frankly, it's been a hard fight, and it's still an uncertain fight. And voters shouldn't have to work this hard. So I think it becomes really important to pay attention in local races. Right now, the national news gets a lot of attention, and it deserves it. And the state gets a lot of attention too, but local elections matter. It's your closest layer of government, and it has a huge impact on your quality of life as well as your life values. And if it's important to you to conserve space for wildlife and for storm management and flood mitigation, that means that you have to vote for the right people in office. Otherwise, we can expect to, with certainty, lose those things. So it's really important to be active, to be engaged, and to be informed. And also to remember that not everybody is as informed. So please share with people, you know, so that you can help push for the candidates that represent, you know, what we try so hard to protect in Orange County together.
And I would just add, again, my thanks to Commissioner Simrod for allowing me to participate. I think I learned a lot tonight. You know, as a brand new person here, I'm going to be asking people for feedback, right? I need to hear from folks, you know, with good ideas and thoughts to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So I'm sure that feedback will continue, but thank you for allowing me to participate tonight. Appreciate that.
Tom, it was my pleasure, and it's been my pleasure getting to know you over the years, and I'm glad to be fighting on the same side with you. So,
And
it's a
thank
good
you
fight.
all. Thank you all for attending and being
Please.
so flexible. We were supposed to do in person. We got kicked out of the venue, and now we're just having to be flexible in this moment. So I'm just so grateful for everybody who paid attention, joined the Zoom, and is here with us tonight. Your attention to this matter is why the toll road isn't already through Split Oak. Because of people like you paying attention, emailing your commissioners, and being vocal. So
Lee,
thank
something
you.
so important that we didn't say is that on Tuesday in the
Mhm.
morning session, so it would
Yep.
mean you have to come and make a public comment at 9 a.m. The Orange County Board of Commissioners will be again talking about Split Oak Forest. So, and what is the most recent verdict of the judge and how it impacts it, and what might we be able to do. And I think it's important to come and look people in the face and say, you know, I'm a voter and I voted for this, and I'm still looking at you for fixing a bad vote, you know, that happened, that put this road through the forest. So, you know, come and hold your elected officials accountable and make sure that they know that you still care and that you're watching.
Yes, thank you. I touched on that lightly, so I appreciate you bringing it back up because I dropped it in the chat and I just dropped it again for folks to please join us for the press conference and the public comment opportunity on January 13th. That's going to be our opportunity to make our voices heard. There's also a petition on savesplitoak.org. Thank you, and thank you both so much for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.